For somebody right now that is having a diet that still has quite a bit of refined carbs and fructose, and now they're tuned into what we're talking about here today, the low carb diet and lifestyle, how do they go about making that switch? Do you recommend doing it slowly over time? Because somebody who has been on a diet like that for years and years, I can imagine trying to switch it like a light switch overnight is going to be very challenging. So how do people do that in a practical sense?
A light bulb moment for me in 2012 or whatever was when I came across this stuff. If you're insulin resistant or overweight, 30% of the carbohydrate you eat gets converted into fructose. It's called a polyol pathway. So fructose is not good. Glucose, carbohydrate, gets converted into fructose. Glucose in excess, and I've made an argument of 4 grams or 1 teaspoon of glucose starts having a negative effect on the system. Pushes up your insulin levels, gets stored into fat, creates inflammation in the blood vessels. So the very first way to go about this is to actually understand the problem, educating yourself. Seed oils just complicate the whole layer of that inflammation because then they become oxidized and that creates even more inflammation on top of the glucose and fructose combination. So your decision as to what you want to do is really based on what your personal requirements are. Some people, and there's a whole variety, there's a whole spectrum out there. So if you've got very poor metabolic health, you might want to go hardcore. If you think you're pretty healthy and you've got no major issues, you may just want to move into this slowly. If you go into it quickly, then you're going to be exposing yourself to what's called keto flu. It's not really a flu at all. It's not contagious or whatever. It just means you're going to be moving from a state of carbohydrate dependence. One of the first things happens, if you eat a lot of carbohydrate, then your body produces a lot of insulin to store that as fat. It's also inflammatory. It also has tumor promotion insulin. But that fat storage thing is that you'll actually, it binds a lot of salt. So if you actually reduce your insulin quickly, your body will excrete a lot of salt, and it will do that with a lot of fluid. So some people who just decide to go hardcore low carb will lose a few kilos in a few days. They'll be peeing it out because of the salt. And if you're losing that salt, you're actually going to feel crook and you feel headachy, and you get that's called the keto flu, and it can come on within a few days and can give you headaches and can last for a week, 10 days. So if you are going to go hardcore at it, I think you need to be A, aware what's going to happen, B, bump your salt intake up. And again, this is a whole myth about salt. James Di Nicolatino, always got to say that slowly, he's got a great book called The Salt Fix. James has gone into this in great detail. And again, a lot of myths, a lot of understanding of what salt. We're born of the ocean. If you believe in evolution, then I think we've come out of the ocean. Our salt's going to mimic salt water. We need more salt. If you've got good kidney function, you will excrete that salt in your kidneys. And so for the vast majority of people, it's almost impossible to have too much salt in your diet because you'll just get rid of it. We've arguably got a J curve, meaning so that if you actually, and it's like a tick actually. If you have too little salt in your diet, there's a lot more complications. There's a bliss point probably higher than what the recommendation is. And if you increase your intake dramatically over time, you might have some minor changes, but it's nowhere near as much as Heart Foundations have made it out to be. Most people's kidneys are working overtime to maintain the amount of salt they've got. Most people can easily throw on a bit more salt on their food. And if you're not eating ultra-processed food, you probably need to put more salt in there. Because A, you're not having the insulin on board, and B, it's not coming with a salt load anyway. So we sprinkle salt on our food all the time. Good quality salt, throw it on. And and I'll pee it out if I'm having too much. So again, that scenario, if you're having keto flu, you're going to need to increase your salt because A, you've stopped your salt intake, and B, your body's going to be getting rid of a whole lot of salt which has been hanging around with the insulin. If you're going to do it slower, which is what happened for us, I mean, the story with me or in our household was I came across the perils of sugar, first of all, which was, okay, so I said, okay, I'm going to cut down the amount of sugar in the house. Then it was the seed oils. So then we got rid of those. And then I said, hang on, carbohydrate. There's the polyol pathway, 30, 40% getting flipped back into fructose. Learning more and more about insulin resistance. And hopefully the population realises that what we're learning about this whole topic of insulin resistance is 10 years old. I'm very proud to be part of that modern framework of actually going forward with it. But it's brand new knowledge for the vast majority of people. So I then said to Belinda, okay, all those carbs have got to go. And to use a term from Karen Zinn from New Zealand, an empty pantry, full fridge. Belinda looked at me on that day. She said, you've gotten rid of sugar. You've got rid of the oils. Getting rid of the carbohydrates. If you take the bacon out, you're out. So bacon's okay. Right. Despite the story about nitrites being bad for you. Again, I can't have nitrites in your diet because in bacon. Well, there's actually more in cruciferous vegetables than there is in bacon. So it's just, again, can't have bacon because it's full of nitrates and whatever. But actually, your vegetables have got more. So hang on, how can you have good nitrates in that and bad nitrates in others? It's the same chemistry. So that's just all BS propaganda again. So people can decide what they want to do. Again, I don't force anyone what to eat. But if you've got a bad diet and you've got poor metabolic health and you've got diabetes or pre-diabetes and you've got a large waist circumference and you're inflamed, maybe before you take another packet of pills, you should look at what you're eating. What you eat, I would recommend being the opposite of what we've been told. Cut down on your sugar, cut down on your carbs, get rid of the seed oils, look towards more animal-based product, which is going to be complete. Cut down on some of those plant-based. I'm not saying you've got to become a carnivore straight away. I'm sort of saying that it's a transition and it's a learning. And I've got that in some of my talks where I think, if you take most people most of society, and I can say that now because it's 93.2% on the last study done on it, were metabolically unwell. So that means 6% of the population are healthy, or 6.8%, 93.2%. So if we take 93.2% of the population, I think they should all look at their diet. My journey was that I started and I was metabolically unwell. I then ate by the food pyramid. Then I tried to outrun that because it didn't help me. It's one of my sayings: if you eat by the food pyramid, you're going to die by the food pyramid. And along the way, you're going to look like the food pyramid. It's just that triangular shape. And then I moved towards fresh, local, seasonal food, which is called low-carb, healthy fat. And then I moved towards keto, and now most people lecturing in this space are almost carnivore. Just some people move a different pathway. They're sick, and then they move towards vegan, a more plant-based diet, which improves their health initially because they've gotten rid of all the crap food. But over time, they will be micronutrient deficient. You can't get your B12s, you can't get certain vitamins, and you're not going to get enough iron. And so over a period of time, they actually get sick and move towards low-carb, healthy fat, keto, carnivore. And I say that because some of the most vocal people in this low-carb, carnivore space used to be vegans. They go, hang on, and they got sick, they got it wrong. And I'm okay with people wanting to be vegan because I think they're taking an interest in their health, they're taking an interest in the environment, even though it's been swayed by vested interest to make those beliefs. But they're interested in outcome. And so therefore, I think Sean Baker's got a site called Recovering Vegans, which again, it's supporting people who actually realise they made a mistake. They're on the journey to better health and going up that pathway. So I think it's for everyone. It's a journey. The very first journey step is to actually look. If you're going to go on a trip, what's the first thing you do about it? You research it. And then you decide if you're going to take the slow train or the fast train. So again, that's where people go, start looking into this. Start seeing whether or not myself and others and you are actually, completely making up this nonsense, or do they sound rational? And I think we sound rational. We might be coming up with some bizarre comments, which is against mainstream, but in fact, the process of how I've gotten to that didn't happen overnight. I mean, in some respects, some people, you can go hardcore now because we've got it all in one package. If you eat sugar, carbs, seed oils in excess, you're going to be sick and inflamed. Drop the whole lot of them and you're going to improve. And that's so that's going from a standard, diet, standard inflammatory diet to keto straight away. Along that way, you're going to feel a bit crook because you're going to go through keto flu, fat adaptation. And the critics of this say, if you do that, your performance, athletic performance is going to go down. But that transition takes 6 to 8 weeks. Most of the studies looking at that are done for over 3 to 4 weeks. And so it's criticised, that doesn't work because their performance goes down. No, they're going through a period of fat adaptation. I'm allowed to tell this story, but we had a dietitian that was working for us, and right at the beginning, she said, I'm going back 12 years, so switched on young woman, triathlete. She said, I think we can improve diabetes. I went, yes, of course we can, So she wanted to travel that path. So we actually started a business, of which we gave to the team because I don't want to be tested with accused of vested interests. She was a triathlete. I gave her a book called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance by Steve Finney and Jeff Bolick. Short book, easy read. They've got 2 books on that topic, but this is way back. Anyway, so she read it. She said, I'm going to do that. Now, at that point in time, she'd been doing triathlons for several years. She could not change her times. She was ranked reasonably well in Australia. And so she decided to do that, and 6 weeks later do a half iron, we call it an iron person now, but knocked 45 minutes off her time, which is massive. So she'd plateaued and could not reach it. So knocked 45 minutes off her time. And then, so improved her swim leg, bike leg, run leg. 6 months later, she then did the Australian Championships and came third. Her career was plateaued until she flipped over and keto adapted, became a fat burner. The tragedy of all that is that she met a guy at that Nationals and has now married him and got kids and moved away from Tasmania. So I lost the dietitian because she keto adapted. So that's a complication of it. You may find that your person that you're working with who's completely on board actually gets so fit and well that she goes and marries some person in another part of the country. So, but what I'm sort of saying, if performance, which is critical, some people say your performance is going to drop off, is actually it takes a period of keto adaptation. There are 3 AFL, Australian football teams here in Australia that have moved down this pathway. They are now known as the running teams. They tend to run out their team, the opposition, in the 4th quarter. some of the military forces are taking this on board, and there's one special forces guy said, when we're doing keto, we are keener. I thought that was a really interesting word. He just felt they're more alert, they can better fueled, fitter, run longer and stronger. Bearing in mind, so if you actually protein and carbohydrates about 4 calories per gram, fat's about 9. So people say, oh, fat's bad for you because it's got more calories. Imagine if you're a soldier and you can carry a kilo of food on you. You can have a choice of carrying, 9 calories per gram or 4 calories per gram. You can carry more than twice as much fuel with you for a given task. So it means you can carry, you're better fueling your soldiers. They're responding better. So, and a lot of work's being done in that space now. And Dom D'Agostino in, I think, Florida is doing a lot of work in that space. Received a lot of money to work with defence forces on that spot. So again, this doesn't happen overnight. If people want to actually expect they're going to feel better overnight, it doesn't happen. Your blood pressure is going to improve. You're going to lose a few kilos of weight because of the fluid, but the transition to better health is going to be over a couple of months. And I say to people, what blood tests do we do? So forget blood tests. How do you feel? And virtually everyone says they feel better. So that's probably the best measure of all. If we want to go down to blood tests and investigation results, there are a whole lot of tests that can be done. But I think that's how do you feel? What do you actually? That's what you asked about transition. What do you want to do? And if you want to go hardcore, okay, this is the way to do it. If you want to do it slow, that's fine as well.
No, you illustrated nicely the point I was trying to address, the fact that there is this transition period for somebody going from a standard type diet to what we're talking about today. And just to make people aware, not to keep the junk in their diet, but maybe keep some of the whole food carbohydrates, healthier choices in for a period of time as you're transitioning if you don't want to hit the wall by making this switch overnight.
The good thing about finding all that cereals and grains and stuff in your pantry is I can feed it to the chickens. Chickens turn it into eggs and give it back to me.
Arguably not the same quality, though.
Well, our chickens are carnivores, but if I want them to do anything, I give them some wheat because they're addicted to the sugar, just like we as humans are. That's a topic. Of pasture-raised animals versus farm-based animals, or factory farming to be the worst example of it. If you look at the omega-3 fatty acid composition of those meats and produce, the omega-6, not the omega-3. So linoleic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid. It's an essential fatty acid that we need to have, but it's also the inflammatory one. That's the ones I talk about in the seed oils. And our omega-6 linoleic acid levels have been steadily rising in our body tissue for over 50 years. So again, I think that's the kicker into the overall inflammatory process. And it's been measured a few times over. If you measure that between pasture-fed animals and I'll include that in wild fish as well. So pasture-fed versus farm-fed, they have a slightly higher linoleic acid level when you start feeding them grains and whatever other produce that goes in, but it's still infinitely lower than having those industrial seed oils in your vegetable oils in your food product. bearing in mind there is no such thing as a vegetable oil. That's a marketing term. It's an industrial oil, which they now call a vegetable oil. So if you have the luxury that we do here in Tasmania, that we can have our pasture-fed raised animals, which are going to be very low in inflammatory seed oils and higher in vitamin K2. This is about segues of one thing after another, but then we're lucky. But if you don't have that, and you have to have your animal-based product from more other sources, try and find that source which is going to be more local. Try and find that source which is going to have a better care of those animals and work towards that. But again, we're very fortunate here. I actually sort of say here in Australia, arguably most parts of Canada, you have the luxury and the privilege of actually eating fresh, local and seasonal. There are vast areas of the planet that never have that luxury. So you've got the luxury of knowledge. You've got access to this information. You have the luxury and the privilege of being in a society where you can probably access it and support it. So I just think it's an absolute crying shame that we have an obesity epidemic, sickness industry, when we're so privileged to not have it. And so it's, my criticism of my fellow man is you have a responsibility. If you've got this amount of privilege, you should have a responsibility to do the right thing by yourself and your community, because there's vast people on the planet that don't have that opportunity. We can talk about all sorts of developing areas and war-torn spaces which have got far more greater problems. Yet we've got this problem of incredible, increasing sickness, which is bankrupting society, communities, and not sort of just bankrupting financially, it's bankrupting them emotionally as well. It's just me drifting off on another philosophical tangent. K2. Yeah, K2. Most people heard of vitamin K. K1's the one found in leafy vegetables. K2, and that's involved in clotting, your blood clotting. K2 is one which hasn't got a lot of airtime, but I think is critical. K2 comes from pasture-fed product, whether or not it's meat, eggs, dairy. K2 is it's not really a vitamin, it's more of a hormone, but it's actually responsible for moving calcium in your body. So what it does, it moves calcium out of your arteries and into your bones. So a lot of people may have calcium supplements. That calcium will get into your bloodstream. A lot of people might have vitamin D supplements, which will move calcium out of your bloodstream and into your tissue. But it will do that at putting that into your blood vessel walls as well as your bones. Whereas K2 actually moves it out of your blood vessels and into your bones. And that's critical. So we've got one of the ways of picking up cardiovascular disease is actually measuring the amount of calcium in the arteries. It's called coronary artery calcium score, or people here have calcified arteries. And if you have a diet high and rich in animal-based pasture-fed food, it's going to be rich in K2, and you're actually going to see that calcium move out of the arteries into the bone. And I'm aware of several people who have had their coronary artery calcium scores decrease by changing their diet to a keto, a more animal-based product. You can get K2 supplements now. But again, not surprisingly, again, we go back in the retrospectoscope. As we've moved towards this more plant-based industrial food, cereal and grain lifestyle, we've seen the development of coronary artery vessel disease, calcification. We've seen the calcification in our vessels. So as we've actually moved away from animal-based agriculture, because in the US have got good data on this, last 40 years, we've reduced our intake of meat. right across, particularly red meat, lesser degree poultry. We've increased the amount of fruit and vegetables. We've increased the amount of cereal and grain. We've increased the amount of alternate protein sources. And all we've seen is and we've increased the seed oil intake. And all we've seen is an explosion of cardiovascular disease, strokes, dementia. And so coming back to the biochemistry, this thing called vitamin K2 does absolutely everything we need. It moves the calcium out of our arteries and back into the bone. What's the natural source? Pasture-fed, animal-based foods. It's so damn simple. But, we've been blinded by all the propaganda. I know I keep coming back to it, but it's sort of a circular argument. We just keep... The answer's simple. I think most things in life, the answer is simple. If it's complicated, we haven't worked it out yet. Nature moves towards simplicity. Simplicity and balance. If you notice, there's nothing straight in nature. Everything's curved and balanced, can take tension, can absorb stress. Nature moves towards the most balanced position. And the moment mankind gets involved, we start doing stupid stuff.
Well, speaking of mankind getting involved, we've talked about the importance of vitamin D and K2, and you just mentioned that you can supplement with it. And this is kind of the anti to what you just said, where we're taking away from simplicity when we get into supplementation and stepping away from nature and the simplicity of this whole thing. But because this modern world has changed so much, you could make the argument that sometimes we need to step in with radical things to counter this radical world we live in. What I'm getting at with all this, though, is any supplements, when somebody is eating the diet you recommend, low carb, healthy fat, any supplements that people should consider on top of that?
One, and that's probably magnesium. Not because I want you to have it, but because our food supply has been affected. So magnesium is now, when we put fertilizers, particularly potassium, into the soil, then that tends to bind magnesium. So the magnesium's in our soil, but it's not actually getting into the plant. Now, that doesn't matter if it's a vegetable or if it's into the grass and the animal's eating it. Our food supply tends to be magnesium depleted. And so magnesium, it's pretty hard to overdose on. It's very hard to get a level too high in the bloodstream. Most people's magnesium levels are low if you measure it. That may be a problem with the way we're measuring, but nonetheless, that's probably... So some people, again, if they're going low carb and they want to do it acutely, I think you need to bump your salt level up, and you might, if you're getting some cramping or feeling odd, you might want to require some magnesium. And there's some of the magnesiums, particularly the magnesium oxide, tends to make you make your poo a bit runny. Some of the others don't tend to. Again, with any transition in diet, you might actually get a bit of constipation. So therefore, keep your fluid intake up. And people can go with constipation either way. But if you're going to be taking a supplement, then maybe a magnesium oxide, which will tend to make you loosen up a little bit. Now, some people are incredibly sensitive to that. Some people are not. So if you're asking me what supplements, I think you need salt when you do that, if you're going to do it, mainly because your body's going to be getting rid of a bit more salt as you're actually getting, strangely enough, healthier and getting rid of that insulin overload, improving your insulin resistant state. Salt's there. If there's one supplement that we do have in the house, it's magnesium. But I don't think we take it very often.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Once you understand where the non-science is coming from, where the propaganda is coming from, and it is industry, pharmaceutical, and religious ideology, now I understand why I was conned in my medical education.